Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of Reader Meets Writer put together by SIBA, which stands for the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. I am your host, Wiley Cash, and at these events, these online events, we welcome authors who you would otherwise be seeing in your favorite local independent bookstore. So perhaps today you've been invited by your favorite local independent bookstore. Well, we encourage you to reward them for this very important, very coveted invitation by purchasing S.A. Cosby's book from the bookstore that invited you today, or any of the books that you may have heard about during these Reader Meet Writer events. I am your host, Wiley Cash. I am a novelist living and working here in Wilmington, North Carolina, where we are having massive thunderstorms. So if you lose me, I will throw it to our director and fearless leader, Linda Marie, the executive director of SIBA, and she will take it from there, but I know we are not going to have any problems. So today we have a really cool event for you. We are joined by the author of the new novel, Blacktop, Wasteland, S.A. Cosby, and we've been on here on Zoom since 4:30 talking about Waffle House, rural life, stuff going on in North Carolina, stuff going on in Virginia. But I want to welcome him to join us. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. S.A. Cosby is a writer from Southeastern Virginia. He won the 2019 Anthony Award for Best Story for Grass Beneath My Feet, and his previous books include Brotherhood of the Blade and My Darkest Prayer. He resides in Gloucester, Virginia. When not writing, he is an avid hiker and chess player. And his new novel, as I said, is Blacktop Wasteland, which has been receiving incredible reviews. It's selling really well from what I can see, and it's got a gorgeous cover. And I want to welcome him and thank him for joining us today. Thanks for coming, man.
Man, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited to be a part of this. Again, thank you so much.
Of course, of course. This is one of those books when I heard it was coming out, I was really excited for a lot of reasons, and we'll talk about those down the road. But when I found out you were doing this, I told Linda Marie, I was like, I'm buying a copy of the book. I want to talk to this guy. I'm excited about this. And one of the things that excited me was, the summaries of the story that you're able to find online. And the crux of the novel, this, young, by relative standards, African-American guy living out in rural Virginia, out of the life. He's a fast driver. He's a mechanic, but he's dipping in and out of the life a little bit, and he gets sucked back in. And I thought that was such a great recipe for a really propulsive novel, and that's really what you've written. So what was the starting point of this book? Like, how did all these ideas come together to create kind of the nexus of this character and the plot?
Beauregard was a character that existed previously in a short story I had written called Slant Six. That story was written for a magazine called Thug Lit, published and edited by the great Todd Robinson, a writer and editor out of New York. And when he decided to shut the magazine down, and he wanted a story for the last anthology, the last collection. And so I love cars. I grew up around shade tree mechanics, and I've always been a fan of the wheelman trope. And so I wrote a short story about Beauregard, recounting how he came in possession of his father's car, a 71 Plymouth Duster. And after I wrote the short story, he wouldn't leave me alone. I just kept going back to him. I wanted to hear his voice again. I wanted to maybe expand on his story. And I thought I could do a couple things with him. One, I thought I could tell a really exciting heist story with action and car chases. But two, I wanted to talk about the relationship between fathers and sons, and the inheritance of pain that we get from our parents sometimes, and how we are unable to move past that. And so when I started writing the book, I initially really just wanted to delve into it was going to be 70 crime story, 30% emotional, psychological revelations. But as the book took shape, it became 50-50. Yeah. And it was sort of cathartic for me. Me and my father were estranged for a number of years. He and my mom separated at early. I tell people all the time, Uh, my early life was a bad country song because my mom and dad split up, our house burned down, and we had to move in with my grandparents. And so, and my mom was disabled when I was a young kid. And so, writing this book was a way to kind of exercise a lot of demons for me, but at the same time talk about larger issues while also hopefully telling an exciting, fast-paced story.
So speaking of exciting and fast-paced, you've definitely written, a literary, all caps literary crime novel. I mean, the language is so gorgeous. Your characterizations are so deep. There are no flat characters in this novel. But, as someone who's written and read widely in that genre, I know how important opening scenes are, right? The opening 20 pages in a book like this is where you grab the reader by the throat. And man, these opening pages are incredible. And you really put Beauregard through all the paces of his characterization. He's a great driver. He's a tough guy. He's also really smart. He looks at all the threads of a situation and figures out what's going on. So can you talk a little bit about the opening scene, or not the opening scene, but the opening kind of, vignette and all the things that went into that?
So it's funny because the original opening in the rough draft was a prologue that melted into the present, and I took it out and I rewrote it. And basically, what I wanted to do was exactly what you said. I wanted to show as many facets of Beauregard's personality and character as fast as possible, so that people understood that he's, like you said, smart, and he's tough, and he's incredibly attuned to his car. He knows how to drive. He's to an extent fearless. He also has a bad temper. That's one of his Achilles heel. He's very prideful and has a little bit of hubris. And so I wanted to kind of wrap all those things together, but also, like you said, draw people in using a trope, that is seen in some crime fictions where, the bad guys are busted by the cops. And I kind of wanted to turn that trope on his head. And so when you open the scene, he's at a illegal street race because he's in financial straits. He owns his own auto mechanic shop, but that's going under because a competitor has opened up in town with, shinier and newer equipment. His mom, who's terminally ill, is about to get kicked out of her nursing home, partly because financial issues, partly because of her attitude. He has a daughter from a previous relationship who wants to go to college, whose first semester's tuition is coming up fast, hard, and in a hurry. And he's married to a wife that he deeply, deeply loves and has two sons, and they need everything that sons need. And so I wanted to put as much pressure on him immediately. My dad said this, pressure makes diamonds or it crushes you. And I wanted to show that Beauregard is the kind of character that, the pressure makes him harder and harder until he becomes like a diamond. But I also thought it'd just be cool to open with a drag race. I love cars. I love the language of cars. I love songs about cars. I'm a big fan of Bruce Springsteen. So, Jungle Land and Thunder Road and all that are rolling around in my head when I created that scene. And so I just wanted people to like Beauregard, feel for him, and enjoy a good old-fashioned street race as much as I do.
Yeah, but I think what you did that was very smart was the street race is the frame of those opening pages, but the race itself lasts 30 seconds of reading time. Mm-hmm. This isn't a novel where you bear down in the nuts and bolts, pun intended, of right. Street racing and of automobiles. This is a novel which really showcases the life of this guy, and to your point, all the pressures he's under. And, I'm a parent, and once you become a parent, and, we're in this interesting generation. I don't know how old you are, but I'll be 43 in September. And we're in a generation where we're having kids a little bit later. And so we're taking care of our kids at the same time that we're kind of called upon to take care of our parents. Yeah. And that's what Beauregard is there. He's got two kids. One needs braces. One just got glasses. His mom's in a nursing home. And this is a man who has no desire except to meet everyone else's desire so he can just sit down. Yeah,
Yeah, just take a deep breath. And
Yeah.
I think the best characterizations, I think the best plots are when competent characters are given incredible circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I wanted to do that with Beauregard. I wanted to I felt bad for the guy at the end of the book. I just wanted to put as much on him so that his, the cream would rise to the top. And at the same time, I wanted him to learn. I wanted him to change. I wanted him to be different from the beginning of the book to, toward the end. And I wanted him to realize certain things about himself. And I really tried to invest all that in the first few pages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely did. And that opening scene, it really speaks to the pressure. I mean, he's out there because he owes, rent. I think it's $1,800. He owes that rent on his shop. He's got all this other stuff. And then, I won't give away how that scene is flipped on its head, but it's done so in like a really surprising way that I didn't see coming at all. But I want to talk a little bit about Beauregard, and we were talking about his name, and I hadn't planned to ask about that, but you mentioned it. So his name is Beauregard Montage. Can you talk about your history with his name a little bit?
Yeah, so his name is Beauregard, nickname Bug Montage. And the first name, I did that intentionally. There's a lot of people, I grew up in the South. I was born in Virginia. I was raised in Virginia, North Carolina. And there are a lot of people, that's a stereotypical name that you would see attached to a Confederate soldier or Confederate general or a Southern quote unquote redneck character. And I wanted to reclaim or claim that name because there's two things happen when somebody finds out you're from the South. One, not everyone, but they sometimes look at you like you're not quite as intelligent as people from other parts of the country. And there's a certain amount of disdain that comes with that. But two, if you're an African American living in the South, then you have experienced a different, not worse, not better, but a different type of racism than people in other parts of the country experience. I grew up in a small town, Matthews, Virginia, where there's a Confederate statue that's 6 steps away from the courthouse building. And it's there to remind you as an African American that you're not going to get the same treatment everybody else does. I went to elementary school in a school that's named Lee Jackson Elementary after Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. And so by naming Beauregard, I wanted to reclaim the identity of the South because it doesn't just belong to neo-Confederate apologists. My family goes back 6 generations in Virginia, North Carolina. And so I wanted to stake a claim a little bit with his first name that, we're here, we're part of this history. We create this history along with other people in this region. And as far as Montage, that's not quite as esoteric. I really just flipped through the dictionary and I just closed my eyes and put my finger on something. And I thought it sounded good. I thought it flowed with his first name. And so, but it's definitely his first name was me attempting to say a few things right out of the gate about him and about this character and about this book. Because I definitely am a son of the South, and I refuse to allow its history and its legacy, its good, bad, and ugly, to be taken from me. And so that was where the genesis of his name came from.
Well, with that in mind, I got my I get the Weekender New York Times delivered to our house every Sunday. And for 5 or 10 minutes, I drink coffee and pretend like I'm going to read the whole thing. But what I really do is I get the book review and I flip through it to see if I know anybody whose book's been reviewed or who's reviewed a book. And I saw the review for Blacktop Wasteland, and man, it was a killer review. And I knew we were doing this, so I was really excited. But to what you just said about, holding on to your history of the South, your place in this country, your family going back, all these generations. The closing lines of the review, the reviewer, whose name I should have written down, but he writes, Beauregard can't badass his way out of the traps of racism, poverty, and absentee parenting. Such an escape would require different skills. It might even require a different America. So can you talk for a moment about the America that Beauregard finds himself in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I wrote the book, I completed the book a few years ago, but the issues that he faced are still pertinent today. They're cyclical, they're cyclical for the news cycle. We're always experiencing them. And, Beauregard is an African-American man in a small Southern town in an area of Virginia that is economically depressed. and he's frustrated as a character, as many people I know are frustrated, because he's doing everything that they tell you should do to succeed. Whenever you see protesters or whenever you see people asking for social justice, there's a segment of society is like, well, you have to do this. You have to be a good citizen. You have to work hard. You have to raise your kids, be responsible. And he's doing everything, and it doesn't matter because a new competitor is open up in town, run by some white boys that literally hit the lottery, and he's bleeding customers. And so he's frustrated because for a lot of people in America, not just African American, but for a lot of people, doing all the right things isn't enough. And so for Beauregard, he realizes that it's not enough. He realizes that he could or should do better than what he's doing. He knows that he's smart. He often knows that he's the smartest guy in the room, but he's frustrated by a society that doesn't see him as anything more than the color of his skin. He's frustrated by his own inability to move on and let go of the past. And so he's living in an America that is, so for so many people, it's a dream, more so, it's almost a fantasy, because, there's a segment of society that will tell you, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, when they neglect to notice that you don't have boots. And I think that's the America that Beauregard finds himself living in.
Or that somebody came along and took your boots before you had a chance to try them on.
Yeah.
And before I get ahead of myself and forget to mention this, I was so excited at the top. If y'all have questions for Shawn, make sure you go to the chat box on your Zoom screen, type in a question, say your name, say your home bookstore, and in the last few minutes of our show, I'll ask him some of those questions. So this book is full of ideas and contemporary issues and fast-moving action and great characterizations. So please ask whatever questions you got while you got him here to ask them. Back to your point. So we have Shawn, Beauregard trying to do all this stuff right. And then we have kind of his foil, Ronnie, who does nothing right. I mean, Ronnie is a dumpster fire. Ronnie is the dude who who you see out at a club or at a bar, and he crackles with the energy of someone who has nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So can you talk about where did Ronnie come from?
Ronnie Rock and Roll Sessions is, he's got, if anybody hasn't read the book yet, one of Ronnie's defining traits is he has a full tattoo sleeve of Elvis tattoos, from young Elvis all the way to obese Viva Las Vegas, Aloha from Hawaii Elvis. Ronnie is an amalgamation of a lot of guys I knew growing up, guys who couldn't get out of their own way to a certain extent. And even then, there's still guys who, were coming from a position of poverty. Class is, I think, right behind race as one of the biggest issues in our country, in America. And Ronnie is a guy that comes from people that, he has an inheritance of just bad luck and bad decisions. And he's the type of guy who's like, he has nothing to lose. He's given up trying to walk the straight and narrow. Like with Beauregard, there's a struggle there where he's trying to do right. He's trying to leave the life behind. And Ronnie's exact opposite. He's fully embraced the life. He's fully just let it wash over him. And it makes him trouble. It makes him dangerous. One thing I will say about Ronnie, he's a double-crossing, backstabbing, duplicitous son of a gun. But he's also like the snake in that song, is The Snake and the Lady. He's a snake when you pick him up. And Beauregard, to his, in light of his hubris, he knows Ronnie's no good. He thinks he can outthink it. He thinks he can outwork it. He can come up with a plan that will take into account Ronnie's duplicitousness. And so, like I said, Ronnie's this kind of character that I wrote as initially a throwaway character, but the guy's kind of charming in spite of himself. He's like, you almost wish if he could just get it right, then him and Beauregard could go their separate ways and no one would get hurt. But Ronnie's one of those dudes that, getting right is not in his lexicon. And so through Ronnie, we see a character who, has fully given himself over to maybe not the madness, but to his lesser angels.
Yeah, and he's trying to rope Beauregard back into one more job that's going to get Beauregard, his mom needs money in the nursing home. His kids need all this stuff, and he's trying to save his business. And he employs his cousin, right?
Mm-hmm. His cousin Kelvin.
He's taking care of all these people, and then there's Ronnie waving, this bad opportunity, and he's like, oh man. But to what you just said about Ronnie, there's a scene where he talks about waiting, like he's used to waiting for things, like waiting for food stamps that come next week. Waiting for opportunities. I mean, he's just a guy who just kind of like waits.
Yeah.
Because like you said, he's got that inheritance of bad luck. He's been conditioned to not have incentive, whereas Beauregard's the opposite. Like he's out there hammering, trying to get ahead, but he just treading water because of the situation. Can we talk a little bit about rural life? This is set in, Southwestern Virginia, right?
Yeah.
Or Southeastern Virginia.
Yeah.
And you think rural life in literature is having a renaissance right now? I'm thinking about there's a new book out from Hub City Press called Sleepovers, set in Eastern North Carolina. There's a lot of renaissance rural life stuff. And why aren't we having a moment?
I think because there's a lot of writers that want. I think there's an idea among people that flyover states, rural America has a certain mindset. And there's a lot of great writers and artists who are trying to stand up and say, well, yeah, there is that kind of mindset here, but let me tell you about my mindset. Or let me tell you about the people I know. Let me give you a more complete picture of rural America. There's writers, I think we moved out of a Southern Gothic storytelling style like William Faulkner and Eudora Welty, the great Flannery O'Connor, and into a more naturalistic Southern or rural Gothic storytelling style. There's a great book called Cottonmouths by Kelly J. Ford from Arkansas that tells a great story about a young LGBTQ character who's trying to find her way and falls in love with a bad woman and gets stuck out on a chicken farm in Arkansas. And there's great stories from little known writers like of course Daniel Woodrell. A lot of people know him from Where Was Bone, but he wrote a whole cycle of books talking about rural life. And I think there's this desire to just give another voice to the people in these areas, to kind of not to apologize or not to lessen their faults, but explain how they got there. And so you're definitely seeing, I don't know if I would say a renaissance, but a reemergence of the rural writer, whether it's in the South or the Midwest. There's great writers telling these stories because I think there's a certain amount of bias, like I said again, between different areas of the country. And so, there's a great book called The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock, which takes place in the Ohio, West Virginia Valley, and that takes place in the 50s and 60s. But, you've got writers like Ernest J. Gaines, who wrote the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, or A Gathering of Old Men, or A Lesson Before Dying, writers that are reinterpreting the rural of America and specifically reinterpreting Southern fiction through a new, more diverse prism. And I think it's just time. I think it's time people feel like, we're not going to be held back. We're not going to be quiet anymore about what's really going on in this part of the country. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. And I look forward to seeing even more voices tell their part of that story.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear you mention Ernest Gaines. He was my mentor in graduate school. And
oh my gosh, wow.
The greatest literary influence I could ever have. And so I'm hearing you talk about, Danny Woodrell and Donald Ray Pollock, and I love Donald Ray Pollock's stuff. And yours has, when I was reading like Reggie and Ronnie and those guys, I was like, man, this feels like Knock 'em Stiff, Ohio. But one thing I'm thinking about, in your case or in my case, I'm thinking about people like Ernest Gaines or Nina Simone or Tennessee Williams, or even Flannery O'Connor going out to Iowa. These were people who had to leave home to write about home, and we don't have to do that anymore.
And I think that's a great thing, because I think, again, there's been a shift in society. For a long time when I would go places, I would have to defend the South and the Southern literature tradition. And I think it's changed because the new South, you have better schools, better education. You have a more dense population that is more diverse. And so, I can write from Virginia. You can write from Winston-Salem. The internet helps with that. You're introduced to people, as we're doing right now, online, or you introduce to ideas that help shape your narrative structure, your narrative voice. At the same time, you're still able to be honest about where you come from and mine those deep reservoirs of truth. I say this a lot. If you're writing a crime novel, I propose that there's no more scary, more intimidating place than a country back road late at night on a moonless evening, and all you can see is two headlights slowly approaching down the road. That's just as terrifying as a back alley in Brooklyn, I think. And I think that because we're more interconnected through social media, through electronics, through travel, through education, we're able to tell those stories from the comfort of our own home, and we're not losing out on anything. I don't think we're missing out on anything at all.
I want to remind folks that we got several minutes here left. If you have a question for Shawn, please put it in the chat box. So I want to ask a couple of questions that folks have here. One is from Jordan from Richmond Fountain Bookstore. Jordan says, I would love to hear you speak more about Daniel Woodrell, especially the Bayou trilogy. To make it a question, which books were great influences on Blacktop Wasteland? Which is to say, what are some major influences of yours, Shawn, that influenced the writing of this book? Daniel Woodrell or otherwise? I
would say one of them probably was, like I said, the Bayou trilogy, but also Winter's Bone was a huge influence. There's a writer named William Gay, and he's a great writer, great story. If you don't know about William Gay, definitely look him up. He wrote a book called Provinces of Night that is an incredibly powerful, it's not a crime novel so much as a neo-Southern fiction literary novel. That was a huge influence. I think one of the biggest influences, I just mentioned it, but Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock, that book blew me away. It blew my mind. And I think one of the other, the last one I think was a huge influence. It wouldn't seem like it, but as I spoke about previously, Ernest J. Gaines, A Gathering of Old Men, it was a huge influence on me because he does such a great job in that book of talking about Black male masculinity in a way that I don't think anybody else had ever done before or since, and in a way that was able to encompass the full panorama of that. The feeling of trying to define yourself as a man in a society that sees you as less than an animal. And so all of those books, but Daniel Woodrell's, the biggest influence from him was the way he is able to structure small town life and create this tapestry where all the threads are interconnected. In small towns, everybody knows your past and everybody knows what you think are secrets. And, and that affects how you live your life. There are families in small towns that are considered the bad family. Those are the drunks, or those are the loose and lascivious folks. And it's hard to escape that. And I think there's a claustrophobia that comes from that you can feel when you read really good fiction about small rural towns. So all of those books were big influences on Blacktop Wasteland.
What about on the noir mystery edge? Who were some of your influences in genre?
I tell you what, for the longest time, I was trying to sound like Walter Mosley because he has such a clarion call of a voice in his fiction. And there's something about the way he describes everyday events through the eyes of Easy Rawlins that is just amazing to me. It's one of the things, it looks easy, but it's not. It's incredibly difficult, incredibly nuanced. Some of my other influences were anything by David Goodis. I'm a huge fan of his. A lot of people may not know who he is, but he was a great noir, really a fatalistic writer from the 30s and 40s. And of course, Raymond Chandler. Raymond Chandler, we forget that he started relatively late in life, and he was originally born in England, and he came to the United States, and he always had, for all of his tough guy talk in his books, he always had this incredibly poetic flair, and we, it's almost become pastiche now, or cliche, his similes and metaphors. And again, it's one of those things that you think is easy until you try to do it. And he really was, he talked about tough guys, but he saw them through a poet's eye. And that's a big influence on my writing in general.
It's interesting to hear you talk about Walter Mosley and trying to write like Walter Mosley. And when I teach writing, I always tell students to try to model yourself after writers that excite you, because that gives you a model and it makes you excited to go to the page. But when I think about Walter Mosley, I think about a writer who writes in almost like this kind of LA news speak, this very like noir, very terse, very cut, very, I don't know, sarcastic, like wry kind of news speak. But when I read Blacktop Wasteland, you write like somebody who grew up listening to stories told by your family, and you can, and when you're born in that culture, you can do everything in your power to write against it, but it just comes out. Did you feel that in the book?
Oh yeah, I grew up around a lot of barbecue pit orators and a lot of family reunion philosophers, and a huge gaggle of gregarious characters. I had an uncle, his name was Edward, we called him Uncle Buck, and he was just a raconteur. He was the one that introduced me to John D. McDonald's work, and he's somebody who could just sit there and you pass him a jar of moonshine, he could pontificate about any subject for as long as you want. And I love the rhythm of that kind of person, that kind of speak, that kind of oratory. And it definitely seeps into my writing to the point where my editor sometimes has to rein me back in and pull me back in a little bit. But it's definitely, there's a rhythm, there's a sing-songy rhythm to that type of conversation that I try to replicate in my writing. I try to have if you're talking about in forms of music, I try to have a lot of high scales at the beginning of a paragraph and then drop it to one or two terse sentences at the end. I like to end chapters with a short burst of like a lot of verbosity, and then end it on one sentence. I do that a lot in Blacktop. I did it in my previous book, because I think it gives the story rhythm. I mean, that's kind of a mechanical thing, but that's something I like to do.
No, man, that's craft stuff. I live for those kinds of discussions. We could have a couple of beers and talk about that stuff. That's where it's at. With that in mind, Stephanie, who's a bookseller at Malaprops in Asheville, North Carolina, she says the dialogue in Blacktop Wasteland is amazing. Do you have to go through many revisions to accomplish that feat?
Would it sound pretentious if I say no?
No.
I mean, I don't want to come off arrogant or egotistical, but I love listening to people. I miss going out to restaurants because I love listening to the rhythm of people. I love like being in a bar and just listening to a conversation, two buddies talking about a buddy's broken heart, or you go to a restaurant and you hear a couple having a very quiet breakup after like 5 years, or you're in line at the Piggly Wiggly and you hear somebody talking about, trying to get their kid to just pay attention in geometry class. I love that rhythm of language. And so when I write, and when I write dialogue especially, I try to replicate that. I try to replicate, because real dialogue is not you say something and then we wait a beat, and then I say something, we wait a beat. People talk over each other. People cut each other off. And so I'll use that in my dialogue. I'll have a person start a sentence and then put a dash at the end of it, and somebody else cuts them off and they jump in front of each other. Or somebody just starts like, going off pontificating, and another person has to stand there for like a minute and a half and let them get it out. And so my dialogue doesn't go through a lot of revisions. I will tell you what goes through a lot of revisions. I am terrible at spatial relations in a book. If you read the first draft of Blacktop Wasteland, Bug's house, it's like 80 feet long, but only like 6 feet wide, and there's like 12 doors that don't belong. That kind of stuff drives me nuts. I have to work really hard at creating the setting, the staging of scenes. I got away from it. I just stopped doing it. I was like, they live in a house, moving on. And so I think every writer has their strengths and weaknesses, and that definitely is one of my weaknesses. But as far as dialogue, I don't do a lot of revisions. I do ascribe to the Elmore Leonard rule. If it sounds like writing, take it out. And so I just kind of, I try to have my characters speak very plainly but eloquently, and that's difficult.
Do you have a copy of the book nearby?
Oh yeah.
Could you find some maybe a couple lines of dialogue? People want to hear it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'll say you talked about spatial stuff that Beauregard and Kia live in a double wide trailer, and you know they want something better. But I thought it was so endearing. There's the scene, and I don't know where it is in the book, but Beauregard has the memory of it being delivered and it being set on the blocks.
Yeah.
And he and Kia standing in the yard because, man, that's the American dream, you know.
Yeah.
You get your own home.
He
and
wants
some people who don't know rural life, they'd be like, oh, they just live in a double wide. But for this couple, they're thinking, oh, we got a home.
We made it.
A place for our family. So.
Yeah, I'll read a couple lines here. This is a scene early on in the book where Ronnie has shown up at Beauregard's house. He wants to talk to him about a business opportunity, and Beauregard is not as receptive as Ronnie would like. So I'll start it on the. Beauregard grabs Ronnie's left hand with his right. At the same time, he reached behind him and slipped the .45 from his waistband. He put the barrel against Ronnie's stomach. Why are you at my house? My children in there, my wife. Why would you come here? We ain't got nothing to talk about. So now you're gonna leave, he said. He spoke softly so that only Ronnie could hear him. Ronnie's brother was standing on the second step of the porch out of earshot. Hey, now hold on, Bug. I ain't mean no disrespect. God damn, man, Ronnie said. His blue eyes were open wide. His black goatee had more gray in it than Beauregard remembered. His temples had gone white, giving him a redneck George Clooney look. Go, Ronnie. I don't want my family to see me splatter your guts all over the driveway. How'd you even find my house? Beauregard asked. Marshall Hanson told me where you stay. Look, man, I didn't know the goddamn thing about the horse with diabetes or whatever the hell it was, Ronnie said. But you should have known, Ronnie. Beauregard said, that's the problem. You should have known. Now leave. Bo, just wait a minute. My boys are here, Ronnie. My boys. What we did ain't got nothing to do with them. I don't bring that shit around my kids, Beauregard said. Come on now, Bub, just hear me out. Beauregard pressed the barrel into Ronnie's stomach. Ronnie winced. I got a line on the job, Bub. A big one. One that can set us up for a long time. A long goddamn time. That's a little excerpt from the book.
And to reference what he didn't know the horse had diabetes.
There's a scene earlier in the book where Beauregard is reminiscing about his last encounter with Ronnie. Ronnie basically got him to help steal a horse from a farm, and they were going to sell it to a person down in North Carolina, but they didn't realize that the horse had some kind of equine diabetes, and when they stole the horse, they didn't steal the medicine. So by the time they got down there, the poor horse had expired. So that's where that.
And Beauregard builds a trailer that matches the horse's other trailer, and they switch the trailers at a gas station and like weight the other trailer, so it feels like they're pulling a horse. And it's this really, really involved thing. Then they get down and they open and the horse is
dead. Yeah.
Which,
so that gives you a lot of
funny to laugh over a dead horse, but.
Yeah, and that gives you a lot of information about Ronnie too, because he comes up with good ideas, but he's not a detail guy. So
yeah, it's great, man. Well, last question I'll ask you. Someone, let me see. It looks like Mika Alana with Book People in Austin would love to know about the inspiration for your female characters in the process of developing such complex and realistic women.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think the female characters were just like Bug and Ronnie, based on amalgamations of people I grew up with. Kia, Ronnie's wife, is she's not this iron woman, this stereotypical iron woman. She knows who Bug is and what he does, but at the same time, and she loves him, but she holds him accountable for who he is. And she tells him, at one point she tells him they have these financial difficulties, sell the car, and he just can't do it. He can't let it go. And she doesn't back off.
She even knows how much he'd get for it. She's like, "You'd get $25,000," and he's like,
yeah.
"How'd you know that?"
And so, but he can't let it go. I think she holds his feet to the fire. She loves him. There's no doubt they love each other, but she loves him enough to be honest with him. And all through the book, at every stage, she keeps telling him, you're better than this. You can be better than this. And unfortunately, as anybody who's ever been in a relationship with anybody knows, can't make anybody do anything. They got to want it for themselves. Conversely, Beauregard's mama, Ella, is again, amalgamation of people I've known who are just so incredibly deeply hurt by life that they have no choice but to strike out and hurt other people. It's almost subconscious. They can't help themselves because they feel so immeasurably broken inside. It's some things that are broken that can never be put back together. And so, when Beauregard's father, early in the book, we find out that Beauregard's dad left him after an incident when he was a kid. And he left him, but he also left his mother. And his mother is devastated by that. And her devastation and loneliness turns to hate. And a lot of that she took out on Beauregard as a kid. And so they have a very complex, very toxic relationship. But even still, with all that toxicity, he still loves her because, at the end of the day, she's his mama. And he tells her at one point, you're as mean as a rattlesnake, but you're my mama and I love you. And I think that's reality for a lot of people as well. Even a character like Jenny, who only has a few appearances in the book, is someone who wants to get out of the life that she's given herself. She realizes that there's no future in the way she's living. And I think that's true of a lot of characters in Blacktop Wasteland, not just Beauregard. They're all desperately trying to get away, not just from Red Hill County, but from their past. But I don't know if you can ever outrun your past. Blacktop Wasteland, if you were to take the title literally, in my mind, is this, this circular road that as fast and as far as you think you're going, you just come right back to where you were. And I think that's a tragedy for a lot of people, and especially a lot of characters in fiction, and especially the characters in the book.
Well, even Jenny and Ronnie, there's a part where even Ronnie knows that he and Jenny on again, off again, on again, off again, they're only on when Jenny is like in one of her hopeless dead-end situations. And as soon as she gets better, she moves on from him. So there is that circularity of tragedy where people are stuck. Well, listen, man, this was awesome, but we are out of time. I want to thank everybody for joining us with this discussion. S.A. Crosby's Blacktop Wasteland. It is an amazing book. It's the ideal summer read, perfect for the times we're finding ourselves living in. Please purchase it from the one that invited you, the independent bookstore that invited you tonight. Thank you all for the wonderful questions. Thursday evening at 7 p.m., we have Laura Prescott, whose debut novel has just gone bananas. So please join us. And if your independent bookstore has not invited you to that event, ask them why. But thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Wiley Cash. This is Reader Meets Writer. I want to thank S.A. Crosby for coming and discussing Blacktop Wasteland with us. And thank you all for being here tonight. We'll see
thank you so much.
Thursday at 7.
All right. Bye-bye.